There is a forest in central India where the rules of the wild are written differently, where the animal that holds the highest rank is not the one with the sharpest claws or the heaviest body, but the one that understands something far more dangerous than strength, the one that understands cooperation. Deep inside this forest, a leopard has ruled a stretch of river gorge for 3 years. It knows every shadow, every game trail, every rocky outcrop where prey lingers at dusk. It has raised cubs here, cached kills in the forks of ancient trees, and defended its range against tigers, against rival leopards, against every threat the forest has thrown at it. It is, by any measure of the wild, a supremely capable animal. And then the dholes arrived. If you have never heard of a dhole, you are not alone. They do not carry the fame of the African wild dog. They do not inspire the mythology of the wolf. They are smaller than you might expect, rust-colored and lean, with rounded ears and an almost fox-like face that gives no immediate warning of what they are truly capable of. But in the forests of India, among people who have spent their lives watching wildlife, the dhole is spoken of with a particular kind of respect. The kind that comes not from size, but from what happens when you see one of their hunts up close. What follows is the story of one extraordinary pack, one very unlucky leopard, and 2 confrontations that challenged everything we think we know about how predators defend their ground. If what you are about to hear sounds like something you want more of, stay with this channel. New stories from the wild go up regularly, and every one of them will change the way you look at the natural world. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The Kanha Pench landscape of central India is one of the most biologically rich regions on Earth. Sal forests tower in dense canopies over undergrowth, thick with lantana and bamboo. Rivers run cold through gorges of red sandstone. Grassland clearings open like windows in the forest, where chital deer graze in groups of dozens, sometimes hundreds, heads up and ears rotating, always listening. This is tiger country, and most people who visit come looking for tigers. But tigers are solitary. Tigers are patient. Tigers move through this forest like dark water, rarely seen and rarely heard. The dhole is something else entirely. A dhole pack is loud when it wants to be. It communicates with a range of sounds that includes whistles, screams, clucks, and a peculiar musical whine that biologists have compared to the call of some birds. When a pack assembles in the morning, the noise is extraordinary. Animals greet each other with frantic energy, tails spinning, bodies writhing in excitement, muzzles pressed together in what looks almost like celebration. There is something infectious about it. Something that feels, even to a human observer, like genuine enthusiasm for the day ahead. The pack at the center of this story was counted at 17 individuals. That is a large pack by dhole standards, and size matters enormously in what comes next. A pack of 4 or 5 dholes is a formidable hunting unit. A pack of 17 is something closer to a force of nature. They had moved into the river gorge from the northeast, following the movement of chital herds that had shifted with the season. Their arrival was not quiet. A pack of 17 animals moving through the forest generates constant sound and scent, and the leopard that held this territory became aware of them almost immediately. The leopard was an adult male, estimated at around 62 kilograms, large for a leopard. He had the broad, scarred face of an animal that had survived real conflict, and the particular stillness of a predator that had learned to conserve energy in a hot climate. He had seen dholes before. Small groups of them had passed through his territory in previous years, and he had simply waited them out, retreating to the rocky ridgeline above the gorge, where they rarely bothered to follow, then returning when they moved on. He had every reason to expect the same pattern to repeat itself. It did not. The pack arrived at the gorge in the early morning of what the local field researchers would later describe as an ordinary October day. Mist was still sitting in the valley. The river was low, barely covering the smooth stones of its bed, and the air had the particular quality of the Indian dry season, sharp and clean, and carrying scent a very long way. The dholes came through the sal forest at pace, not chasing anything, simply traveling, the way a pack moves when it is covering ground with purpose. The leopard was in a tree. He had made a kill the previous evening, a young chital doe that he had hauled up into the fork of a teak tree about 6 meters off the ground. He was in the branches above it, drowsy and full, doing what leopards do in the hours after a kill. Almost nothing. And then the whistling started. To understand what happened next, you need to understand something about how a dhole pack processes its environment. A pack of 17 animals is not simply 17 individual noses and 17 individual pairs of eyes. It functions as an integrated sensory network. When one animal detects something, the information moves through the group faster than you can observe it happening. Head positions change, the quality of movement shifts, and when the object of attention is something large and potentially dangerous, the pack does something remarkable. It organizes. There is a structure to Dhole packs that researchers are still working to fully understand, but certain things are consistently observed. There are individuals that consistently lead approaches. There are individuals that consistently flank. And there are individuals that consistently hold back, not from cowardice, but from function. They are the reserve, the second wave, the safety net. When the leading animals caught the scent of the leopard and looked up to find him staring down at them from his teak tree, the pack did not scatter. It assembled. Within perhaps 90 seconds, animals that had been spread across 30 meters of forest floor had redistributed themselves around the base of the tree in a loose, watchful arc. The leopard looked down at them. They looked up at him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first dhole jumped. Not high enough to reach the leopard, not even close, but high enough to be a statement. And in that instant, the leopard understood that something was different about this encounter. He had been mobbed before by smaller groups. He knew the routine. He was prepared to sit it out. But these animals were not following the routine. They were running it. Two dholes began to climb the tree. Dholes are not natural climbers the way a leopard is, but they are agile and determined, and the lower branches of the teak were broad and reachable. One of them got up to the first major fork, perhaps 3 meters off the ground, and held that position, ears forward, watching the leopard above. The leopard moved. He shifted his weight toward the outer branches, away from the climbing animal, and in doing so, moved himself into a position that the dholes on the ground clearly anticipated. Because 3 animals on the far side of the tree immediately repositioned, placing themselves between the leopard and his cached kill. The signal was unambiguous. They were not simply harassing him, they were cutting him off from his food. What happened over the next 40 minutes has been described by the field researcher who witnessed it as one of the most tactically complex interactions between predators he had seen in 2 decades of watching wildlife. The leopard made 3 attempts to descend the tree and reclaim his kill. Each time, the pack responded with coordinated pressure that forced him back up, not by attacking him, not by putting themselves in the direct path of his claws, by moving in ways that consistently denied him a clean route to the ground, by keeping 2 or 3 animals on the tree itself, limiting his ability to maneuver on the branches, and by maintaining a constant, shifting presence on the ground that gave him no angle of descent that felt safe. Eventually, the leopard descended on the opposite side of the tree from the kill and ran. He ran well. Leopards are extraordinarily fast over short distances, and he put distance between himself and the pack with impressive speed, moving up the slope toward the rocky ridgeline where he had retreated before. The dholes gave chase. This is important. They did not simply let him go and take the kill. They chased him, 17 animals running a leopard across broken terrain, through thickets of bamboo, up a slope studded with loose sandstone and thorn scrub. The chase lasted perhaps 6 or 7 minutes before the leopard reached the high rocks where the footing became too uncertain for the pack to press hard. They pulled up at the base of the ridge, milled around for a short time with the particular restless energy of animals still in a state of high arousal, and then turned back down toward the gorge. They returned to the tree. The kill was still in the fork. They ate what they could reach, which was most of it, and spent the rest of the morning moving through the gorge. The leopard did not return to the gorge that day. Now here is where the story becomes something more than a single remarkable observation, because what happened was not over. The pack stayed in the gorge. They were not passing through. They had chosen it with its river access and its concentration of chital and sambar deer as a base. They made 2 kills over the following 3 days, a chital stag taken at the river crossing and a juvenile sambar in the grass at the edge of the forest. They were efficient and they were settled. The leopard was watching from above. This is something that is easy to underestimate about leopards. They do not simply move on when displaced. They monitor. They wait. They understand their territory not as a fixed possession, but as a dynamic resource that requires ongoing management. This particular male had too much invested in the gorge to walk away cleanly. His knowledge of the terrain, his cached scent markings, his familiarity with the behavior of the prey animals in this specific stretch of forest, all of that represented a competitive advantage he was not willing to simply surrender. On the 4th night after the initial confrontation, the leopard came back down. He moved at around 2 in the morning, when the forest was at its deepest quiet. The dholes were sleeping in a loose cluster near the river. Dholes, unlike some pack hunters, do not post sentinels in the way that might be implied by that word, but they sleep in arrangements that mean almost any approach will wake at least one animal on the periphery, and what wakes one wakes all. The night observation of this encounter was incomplete due to conditions, but what could be pieced together from tracks and disturbance in the morning was significant. The leopard had approached to within roughly 20 meters of the sleeping pack before the first animals woke. At that point, the forest would have exploded with sound. 17 animals in a state of alert are not quiet. The screaming call of dholes at close range is a sound that carries for kilometers, and it hits the nervous system of almost any animal that hears it like a physical impact. What the tracks suggested was that the leopard had not stood its ground. The marks of a large cat moving at speed were pressed into the soft earth along the riverbank, heading south, away from the pack. The pack had pursued for some distance, maybe 200 meters, before the tracks diverged and the leopard's trail moved up onto harder ground where it became impossible to follow. He had come back for his territory in the middle of the night, and 17 whistling, screaming, surging dholes had run him out a second time. By morning, the story had effectively been told. The leopard did not return to the gorge while the pack remained. Over the following 12 days, the dholes used the gorge as their primary base, hunting the river corridor and the adjacent grassland with the methodical efficiency that makes them among the most successful predators in Asia. Their kill rate during this period was extraordinary. Researchers later calculated that the pack was killing more than once a day on average during this stretch, a rate that reflects both the richness of the prey base in the gorge and the pack's exceptional coordination. They hunted chital in the open, using a strategy that has been documented in dhole packs elsewhere, but rarely observed with such clarity. A group of animals would push into a herd from one direction, not to catch immediately, but to move animals toward a narrowing in the terrain where a smaller group waited. The chital, for all their speed and agility, were funneled. The waiting animals did not have to be fast. They just had to be in the right place. And the pack, somehow, was always in the right place. They hunted sambar differently. Sambar are larger and more dangerous than chital. An adult sambar stag can weigh over 250 kilograms and is capable of seriously injuring adults with its antlers or hooves. The pack approached sambar with more patience, following a selected animal for longer before committing to the chase, and they committed the chase in a way that preserved energy, rotating animals to the front so that no individual was running at full effort for an extended period. It is the same principle as a relay race, and it works for the same reason. Fresh legs reach the finish line faster than tired ones. On the 8th day of their residence in the gorge, something happened that added a new dimension to the story. A tigress moved through. She was a large female, probably the dominant female of the wider area, and she traveled the gorge in the late afternoon with 2 subadult cubs, animals perhaps 14 or 15 months old, and already impressive in size. The pack detected her from a distance, and the response was notable. They moved, not in panic, not in chaos, but decisively, pulling back toward the northern end of the gorge, away from the tigress's line of travel, with the quiet efficiency of animals that understood exactly what they were dealing with. Tigers kill dholes. This is a documented fact. Individual dholes are vulnerable to a tiger, and even a pack will generally avoid a direct confrontation with one. But the pack's response to the tigress was instructive for what it was not. It was not retreat out of the gorge. It was not dissolution of the group into scattered individuals. It was a managed withdrawal to a safe distance, followed by a settling. The pack waited, the tigress passed through, and the dholes moved back into the southern portion of the gorge, within 2 hours of her departure. This is a level of situational awareness that demands attention. The pack was not simply reacting to stimuli. It was making assessments. The tigress, a genuine threat. The leopard, a manageable one. The territory, worth holding. These distinctions were being made continuously, and the decisions that flowed from them were executed collectively, with a consistency that implies something more than instinct alone. There is a long-standing debate in animal behavior about the nature of intelligence in social carnivores. For much of the 20th century, the dominant view was that the impressive coordination of pack hunters, like dholes and African wild dogs, was essentially a product of instinct and simple conditioning. Animals learned certain movement patterns that triggered certain responses in other animals. The whole thing could be explained without invoking anything like conscious planning. That view has become increasingly difficult to defend. The evidence from decades of careful field observation, including studies specifically focused on dholes in Indian reserves, suggests something considerably more sophisticated. Animals in a pack appear to respond not just to the current position of prey or rivals, but to anticipated future positions. They appear to adjust strategies mid-hunt based on new information. They appear to make decisions that would be very difficult to explain purely through conditioning. Whether this constitutes planning in the sense that a human uses that word is a genuine question. But it is no longer a question that can be answered with a simple no. The story of the gorge and the leopard illustrates this in a particularly vivid way. The initial displacement of the leopard from his kill might be explained as opportunistic mobbing, but the subsequent management of his re-entry attempt, particularly the nighttime confrontation, required the pack to maintain awareness of a threat that was not immediately present, and to respond to it collectively, in the dark, within seconds of it materializing. That is a very different kind of behavior. Let us talk about the leopard for a moment, because his experience deserves its own attention. A leopard being displaced from its territory by dholes is not without precedent. It has been observed in other locations across the Indian subcontinent and in parts of Southeast Asia. But it is not common, and it is not easy for the leopard involved. Territory for a large carnivore is not simply a place, it is a survival system. The knowledge embedded in a territory, where prey concentrates at different times of day, where rivals typically move, where the safest resting sites are, where water is reliable in the dry months, represents years of accumulated experience. To be removed from that system, even temporarily, is genuinely costly. For this particular leopard, the displacement into the rocky ridgeline above the gorge meant access to poorer prey, reduced shelter options, and exposure to the movement of other large carnivores through a zone that he had less intimate knowledge of. He was not simply inconvenienced. He was operating at reduced efficiency in a landscape where reduced efficiency can translate into mortality. The two attempted returns to the gorge were not expressions of stubbornness, they were attempts to recover a competitive asset. The fact that both attempts failed, the first in daylight against a pack in full active coordination, the second in darkness against animals that woke within seconds and responded within a minute, says something important about the nature of the dual pack as a territorial force. A tiger holds its territory through an advertisement of individual power, scent marks, scrapes, roaring, direct confrontation. The signal to rivals is essentially personal. I am here. I am large. Do not test me. A dhole pack holds its territory through presence and response capacity. The signal is different. We are here. We are many. We will respond immediately and collectively to any challenge. These are not equally matched systems when the numbers favor the pack sufficiently. A pack of 4 dholes against a leopard is a genuinely uncertain contest. A pack of 17 dholes against a leopard is not uncertain. The arithmetic overwhelms individual capability, and the leopard, with the particular intelligence that makes large felids such effective survivors, understood this. He read the situation accurately, and he made the rational choice, painful as it must have been. On the 12th day, the pack left the gorge. They moved southwest, following a dispersal pattern that the field team had begun to recognize over several years of monitoring. The pack used the broader landscape in a roughly cyclical way, returning to productive areas seasonally, moving with prey concentrations, and adjusting their routes based on factors that were not always immediately apparent to the researchers following them. The leopard returned to the gorge within 48 hours of the pack's departure. He moved carefully, scent checking extensively, spending 2 full days re-establishing his familiarity with the area, before returning to anything like his normal behavioral patterns. He re-established scent marks along the key boundaries of his range. He returned to his preferred rocky ledge above the river bend. And within a week he had made 2 kills within the gorge and was behaving in all observable ways as if the preceding 2 weeks had not happened. But something had changed. When field researchers looked at his ranging data in the weeks that followed, a subtle but consistent pattern emerged. He was using the core of the gorge, the richest section near the river crossing, slightly less than he had before. He was spending more time on the peripheral areas of his territory, the higher ground and the eastern edges, than was typical for him in this season. It would be an overstatement to call this fear, but it might be accurate to call it a learned adjustment. The gorge had proved to be a place where the rules could change without warning, and his behavior reflected that. Not dramatically, not in ways that fundamentally compromised his survival, but measurably. This is the quiet way that ecology actually works, most of the time. not in catastrophic single events, but in gradual adjustments. A leopard uses its territory slightly differently. A prey species shifts its grazing pattern slightly. A smaller carnivore adjusts its foraging route. Over time, these small changes accumulate into the landscape-level patterns that ecologists observe when they study a system across years or decades. The Dhole pack that spent 12 days in the gorge left a mark on the landscape that went far beyond the bones of their kills. The Dholes, for their part, showed no particular sign of having found the experience remarkable. They moved on with the same exuberant energy with which they had arrived, hunting efficiently, communicating constantly, managing their internal dynamics with the complex social intelligence that keeps a large pack functional. For them, the gorge had been a productive resource. They had used it, they had defended it against the resident predator, and now they were moving on to the next resource. The leopard was simply a problem they had solved, twice, and then left behind. There is something almost instructive about the scale of this asymmetry. The leopard spent weeks recovering his territory and adjusting his behavior as a result of the encounter. The Dholes were done thinking about it before they had crossed the next ridge. This is perhaps the most revealing thing about what it means to be a social predator versus a solitary one. Solitary predators carry the full cost of every conflict and every territory challenge individually. The psychological weight of threat, the recovery time, the adjustment period, all of it falls on a single animal. A pack distributes those costs. The individual members of the Dhole pack that confronted the leopard were not significantly stressed by the encounter in any way that persisted. The pack moved on, whole, energized, functioning. The leopard moved on alone, recalibrating. Understanding this dynamic has real implications for conservation, and it is worth spending a moment on that. Dholes are listed as endangered. Their total population across Asia is estimated at somewhere between 2,500 and some, estimates as low as 1,500 mature individuals. They have disappeared from much of their former range, lost to habitat fragmentation, prey depletion, disease, and persecution. In some regions, they were actively hunted because they were seen as competitors to tigers, which were the animals that colonial-era wildlife managers and, later, Indian game authorities prioritized. This was a profoundly mistaken approach, and we know that now. What the story of this pack illustrates is not simply that dholes are impressive hunters. It is that dholes are a structuring force in the ecosystem they inhabit. Their presence changes the behavior of other predators. Their hunting pressure shapes prey distribution. Their movement patterns influence plant communities by affecting where and how much grazing occurs. Remove them from the system, and the system changes in ways that are not always visible immediately, but become increasingly apparent over time. The gorge that the Dhole pack used for 12 days was a richer system for their presence. The high kill rate they maintained during their residence pushed the chital herds to use different parts of the grassland, which affected grazing pressure on vegetation, which had downstream effects on soil and water retention. The leopard's adjusted behavior meant he was hunting slightly different prey corridors, which in turn affected how those prey moved. Everything connects to everything else, and the dhole is one of the connections that keeps the whole web taut. India's protected areas represent some of the best remaining habitat for dholes, and populations in places like Kabini, Nagarhole, Bandipur, and the Kanha-Pench corridor have shown that where prey is abundant and persecution is controlled, packs can grow and thrive. The pack at the center of this story, with its 17 members, was a product of exactly that kind of healthy system. A large pack means a protected area is functioning. It means prey is sufficient. It means the social structure of the species is intact enough to retain adults who might otherwise disperse, building the kind of numerical strength that can hold a river gorge against a leopard. Twice. The field researcher who documented these events has described watching the first confrontation with a kind of awed disbelief. Not because dhole-leopard interactions are unheard of, but because the precision of the coordination he witnessed was beyond anything he had previously seen documented at this level of detail. The way the pack repositioned around the tree, the way individual animals maintained pressure on the climbing routes while others secured the kill, the way the chase up the ridge was organized, with animals holding formation rather than simply pursuing in a mob. He described it, in his notes, as watching a group of animals that understood the problem and were solving it together. That phrase stays with you. Watching a group of animals that understood the problem and were solving it together. Because that is not a description we reach for easily when talking about non-human animals. We prefer simpler explanations, instinct, conditioning, learned pattern. And for much of animal behavior, those explanations are sufficient. But there are moments in the field, and this was apparently one of them, where the behavior you are watching does not feel like it is being generated by simple rules. It feels like it is being generated by something that deserves a better word. Whether that word is intelligence, or whether it is simply a form of collective processing so sophisticated that it produces outcomes indistinguishable from intelligent planning, is a question that wildlife science will be working on for a long time. But for the purposes of understanding what dholes are and what they represent, the practical answer may be that the distinction does not matter very much. A dhole pack behaves as if it is thinking, and the animals and ecosystems around it respond to it as if it is thinking. The leopard in the gorge certainly seemed to treat it that way. There is one more thing worth considering about the 17 animals that spent 12 days in that river gorge, and it has to do with what a pack actually is, at its deepest level. A dhole pack is not simply a group of animals that happen to hunt together. It is a multi-generational social unit with a shared history. The animals in it know each other as individuals. They have grown up together or been incorporated into the group through specific social processes. They have hunted together long enough to develop the kind of mutual understanding that allows two animals running on opposite sides of a thicket to arrive at the same point at the same time, without visible communication. They have raised pups together. They have survived illness, injury, conflict, and loss together. The pack is a collective intelligence, yes, but it is also something more personal than that. It is a community. When the pack assembled around the base of the leopard's tree, the animals doing the assembling were not strangers acting on abstract instinct. They were individuals with particular roles, particular histories, particular relationships with each other that had been built over time. The animal that climbed to the first fork and held position there, 3 meters above the forest floor, staring up at 62 kilograms of irritated leopard, was doing something that required a specific kind of confidence. Not the confidence of ignorance, the confidence of trust. Trust in the pack below, trust in the system. That is what 17 animals in a healthy, cohesive pack represent. It is not simply arithmetic, it is accumulated trust, expressed as collective power. The leopard was an extraordinary animal operating alone, and he ran. Not because he was weak, not because he was cowardly, but because he was, in the end, one, against a force that had learned to function as something considerably more than the sum of its parts. 12 days in a gorge, 2 confrontations, 2 retreats by an apex predator on home ground, and then the pack moved on, whistling through the sal forest, into whatever came next, as if the whole thing had been the most natural thing in the world. Because for them, it was. In the Kanha Pench landscape, the seasons turn, and the prey herds shift, and the river runs low, and then high and low again. Predators move with these rhythms. Territories contract and expand. Alliances form and fracture. The forest is never static, never settled, always negotiating the terms of its own continuation. And in the middle of all that, a pack of rust-colored dogs with rounded ears and musical voices holds a piece of it together, hunting with a precision that still stops researchers in their tracks, defending resources with a tactical sophistication that sends leopards up trees, and moving through the landscape with an energy so uncontained and so collectively alive that watching them feels less like watching animals and more like watching the forest itself think. The dhole is not a famous animal. It does not carry the weight of mythology that surrounds the tiger. It does not generate the conservation fundraising that large, charismatic megafauna tend to attract. It is, in some ways, the working predator of the Indian forest. Present, essential, overlooked. But the 17 animals that moved into a river gorge one October morning and spent 12 days running a resident leopard off its own ground, not once but twice, with a coordination that a wildlife researcher described as watching a group of animals understand a problem and solve it together, those animals deserve to be known. Their story deserves to be told. Because the wild does not only